Hey guys, welcome back. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next set over here. We just looked at how to do PAP authentication with PPP. Now the next video over here, we're going to take a look at the better way of doing it. That is where I send the password not in the clear, it's hashed and sent across to validate my layer 2 link, my PPP link. So again, the advantage, just like in PAP, the advantage is that I'm authenticating the link before I bring it up, but the added advantage is even the password is a little secure, more secure than your app authentication. So most of the time in the industry, if you're doing PPP authentication, rather than using PAP, you're going to be using CHAP. It stands for Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. It's a hash packet, a hash version of the password that's sent, not the actual password. So two main topics that we'll be covering over here: CHAP authentication, talk about what it is, and then basically implementing it and verifying it. Again, the same topology. I'm just going to build up on what we've done already and then change that PAP authentication to CHAP. I'll show you how to negate the older commands and put the new one in. Or what I can do over here is I'll default the interface, the S10 interface on both the routers, and start it from scratch. That will also give you, that'll also show you the way that if you did do a configuration on a particular device, how do you get it back to its default configuration. All right, but before we go into the configuration part of it, let's go ahead and take a look at CHAP a little bit. CHAP, as I said, again, is one of the advantages of PPP over HDLC. That is the authentication part of it. As I said, it doesn't send the actual password across, so clear text password is not sent. It is a hash password that is sent. Now, PPP uses the host name as a username by default. So if you want to, you don't even need to send anything. By default, if you create a username, or sorry, if you have a host name R1, you have a host name R2 over here, I can immediately create a database over here on R1 for R2 along with the common password. Let's say Cisco123, and over here the username that will be created will be for R1, the host name, and the password will be Cisco. But if optionally, if you do want to set up a password that is username that is different than the host name, you do have the ability to do that. You can use, just like you use PPP PAP sent username over here, the command for doing the same thing is PPP CHAP hostname, and you can put another command called PPP CHAP password to set the password that you're going to send if you're not planning on setting the default. All right, so the router will need to create a username for the remote device. We talked about it. Now you might say, well, if I don't specify any username password sent, how do I know what to use? Let's go to the whiteboard and let me explain that to you guys, the way it works. With CHAP, when I create my username for the other guy, let's say this is router 2, I'll create a username over here for R2 with the password of, let's say, Cisco123. On router 2, you would do the same thing, create a username, but over here the username will be R1 and the password will be the common password, Cisco123. So it's going to be the same. Now the way it works is when router 1 comes up and says, hey, listen, I want to communicate to you, he will send his username along in that communication saying my name is R1 based on what my host name is by default, and I want to authenticate you. And he's going to do the same thing. He's going to say I'm R2 and I want to authenticate you. So right off the bat, R1 knows who is the other guy on the other side based on the username. Now when he needs to send his password, he will check up that user in the local user accounts database and sees that the password configured for R2 is Cisco123. So when he wants to send, he's going to send the corresponding password over here. He's going to say, I'm R1, the password is Cisco123. It is all hashed. And similarly, R2 would have received R1 as the inbound, and it would find out that R1 is using this particular password, and that's what it sends across over here. I'm R2 and my password is Cisco123. That's the way it actually works. So now you have the ability, if you don't want to use the database to specify your username and password, you need to create the database itself for the remote guy, but if you don't want to pick the password or the username from the host name, you do have the ability to do it under the interface. All right. What we'll do is, to make it work or to show you both mechanisms, on one side I'm going to use the default host name and let the host name be sent across automatically. On the other side, I'm going to use the CHAP hostname command to configure it, so you guys get a chance to see both sides or both ways of doing it. So again, my topology is this over here: router 1 connected to router 2 with the serial interface. The first thing that I want to do is wipe off the config of S10. How do I wipe off the config of that interface in one shot? Let's go to my router, router 1, same router that we left off in the previous lab. If I do show run, now if I do show run, it shows me the entire config. One of the things that you can do is you can say show run interface S10. When you do that, it shows you all the config for S10. Now I'll go to global config, and if I want to wipe off this S10 clean, I can use a command called default interface S10. What that does, it wipes off all the config underneath S10 in the running config. So now if I do show run interface S10, you'll notice that it is a blank interface now. I'll do the same thing on R2 so we can configure it from scratch. Show run interface S1/0 has a bunch of config on it, and then I'll say default interface S1/0, wipes it clean. Show interface S10, it's blank. Now let's go to router 1 and configure it. I want to do it based on the PAP authentication, and I'll do the lab based on the requirements over here. It says configure PPP authentication between R1 and R2 using CHAP. R1 should use R1 as its username. R2 should use router 2 as the username. The common password should be Cisco C capital Cisco123. Now, how do I go about doing it? On router 1, because I'm using the normal host name, all I got to do on router 1 is, again, let me do this. I'll turn the debug on so we can see the authentication taking place. PPP authentication shows me the PPP authentication commands for authentication, the debug for it, the actual communication between the devices under the hood. So over here under the interface, before going to the interface, I'll say router, and it says the other router is router 2 based on the question over here. The name of router 2 is router 2. So username router 2, password, we said the common password is Cisco with C capital, Cisco123. Set it up. So I created a database for the other side. Now locally, I want to use my local host name as my username. So with CHAP, you have the ability to do that. I'll give the IP address, same IP address, 12.1. I'm not going to change it. In CAP, I'm going to set it to PPP. PPP authentication, I'm going to change it to CHAP. Okay, I've set it to CHAP and no shot. Notice I did not specify any send username or send password. The default username is going to be the host name on the sending out because I didn't configure it. Now when the other guy sends me, he's going to say I am router 2. I'm going to go into my local database and see that in the local database router 2 has a password of Cisco C capital, and that's what I'm going to send to the other guy. Okay, so that's the plan over here. I've done my configuration on router 1. Let's go ahead and configure router 2 now. Interface S1/, oh actually before I do that, username for the other guy is R1, password is Cisco C capital 123. Now over here I do want to put my username and password, which is different than the host name. So I'll say interface S1/0, IP address 192.168.12.2. In CAP is PPP. PPP authentication is CHAP, and my CHAP host name is router 2. It's not the default username or the host name. My username is router 2, not the host name. And PPP CHAP password is Cisco123. And as you do that, it will go ahead and bring the link up, and let's take a look at it. It was failing initially while I was configuring it, but as soon as I configured it, outbound challenge from R1, that's me, outbound, O is for outbound, inbound challenge is from router 2, so it's using router 2 as the username. That's where my authentication send and receive, hostname and password, we've done that. Outbound and inbound response came in, and what is it? Success, because both the responses were success, the interface automatically comes up. So if you do show IP interface brief, it is up, ping 192.168.12.2, it's up. And the interface, if you check the interface encapsulation, it is set to PPP, and the authentication we talked about already. All right, I showed you the debug for the authentication already. So that's PAP, that's CHAP. That's a much better way of doing authentication. Rather than just doing the authentication based on PAP, which is clear text, CHAP allows you the ability to hide your password, hash it before you send it across. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Now the next video, I'm going to start it from scratch because I want you guys to see how to bundle the multiple links into a single logical link, which is called multi-link. See you in the next video.